Know Thyself is dedicated to the exploration of the most rewarding task an individual can ever embark on, the journey to find oneself. Our intention is to investigate the universal principles that have equipped our species to seek the treasure of all treasures, self-knowledge. With your host, Daniel Powinski and Eduardo Manteca, this is the Know Thyself podcast. All right, welcome to the Know Thyself podcast. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Let's do this. An important topic that we should definitely be very thankful that we can cover in like such a weird situation that we're in, even just as like not just a country, but even the world right now. And so with today, I hope to talk about, more about how we can utilize the full spectrum or the full potential of our understanding. And with that, today we'll be covering the esoteric sort of motive for why we even study these mystical philosophies or these interpretations of all the things that we've already covered throughout the podcast. And they go way beyond our podcast, obviously, in time, as far as the principles that we've been discussing and how to really understand them so we can apply them. So yeah man, let's get started.
Awesome. And and you know what? And always a great introduction, because I think this is a very important time to kind of think about, how can we utilize the most information and accomplish the most in our spiritual growth?
Right.
Because again, I think we have this global call to action right now that you're right. It's not just in the United States. The whole world is at a turning point. It's going to come down to our free will decision. So yeah, what we're going to kind of chat about today is what we're really going to look at is the esoteric similarities and perceived differences between Hinduism and kind of your Abrahamic religions in the West. So that's going to cover Judaism, Christianity, and also Islam.
Right.
And just really kind of how they almost kind of perceive the universe and the outplay of the creator within the universe a little bit differently, both being correct in their aspirations and both alluding to the other as well. So they give evidence of both sides, but really how we kind of see them and how they kind of present themselves kind of gives us this two different approaches to understanding this creative energy that in this creative universe that we find ourselves in. And really what this is going to be kind of entailing is this is really going to be kind of the beginning of us getting into astrotheology. So astrotheology is the evolution of consciousness over time. And I know we've spoken about this before, but there's always been this very important order to how spiritual progress happens and how it kind of flourishes, and when certain prophets come at certain times and when certain teachings are presented. It all kind of comes to these really, really big cycles, which is the evolution of consciousness. And as really white magicians and kind of individuals that are really trying to choose the path of love and truth, we know our only goal and our only objective is to align ourselves with that universal consciousness to help aid in the evolution rather than the destruction of consciousness. And that's really where our role is. So today what we're going to do is we're going to kind of take a look at Hinduism and its unique approach to what they would consider the Godhead. And then we're going to also kind of look at those Abrahamic religions like we were talking about and kind of how they approach the Godhead, and really how the alchemists and the Hermetics and everybody we've been talking about would kind of be an interplay in between both. And that's really kind of what the esoteric is. It's that connection between all religions. So we're really going to study one of the oldest, most unique religions in the world today with Hinduism. But again, it's going to be such a little sample because we have this little bit of time, and this is such an old, beautiful.
It is the self-God.
Yes, absolutely. So there's just so much to cover. So we're not really looking at this as really just kind of an introduction, and just to kind of get us thinking about that aspect. And really what this is kind of telling us too is this is really kind of the process of you kind of find the spiritual path that resonates with you, but at the same time, you have to go back and you have to get all the other teachings and expressions of these universal principles that we've been studying and see how they are perceived in other spiritual, almost like metaphors or myths, but just kind of understanding, getting a whole picture. So just like when we were talking about breaking down the zodiac and you want to get all 12 signs, this is kind of the process of how we kind of do completion on how we really understand this 5 sense construct that we find ourselves in, and how even both of them kind of come back to, just that self. So this evolution of consciousness, is really where we're kind of looking at this is it's how do we positively aid the evolution, and, how do we make that kind of our role? So this, in this whole journey and this whole process we've been going through this podcast, this journey to find oneself, we really kind of see that we almost become a sacrifice to the bigger. And that's kind of what this is all about, and really just kind of tapping into that whole idea of those many-faced gods. And it's kind of stuff that we've kind of spoken about in the past, but just going to kind of bring it up and kind of get connected with it today.
Right. Cool. No, I know I'm excited to hear what we're going to break down with Hinduism, and I'm curious as to, what we just cover when you're saying that even though it's aligning yourself with that consciousness or that higher, like the self God, do we expect to also understand why the yoga practice, why the, how,
right.
Yeah, I'm just curious as to it goes so far back that,
right.
What are the most important things that you believe in that, what Hinduism has brought to the world itself? What are those things right now that we can...
Yeah, well, right off the bat, I think a unique thing about Hinduism that all religions can kind of take on, and most of us as spiritual students have attached this practice, and we kind of adopt this practice. But the idea of Hinduism is going to be, because it's kind of based on almost like a monotheist situation, where they have their supreme deity, which is the most high on their kind of their ladder, but they have an ability to adapt prophets when they come without haste or without tension of it discerning and discrediting another prophet that they've had. Right. So that's going to be something we see in like the Abrahamic religions, especially between like Christianity and Islam. It's that argument about whose God is the true God. And really, when we break it down, it's the same God. Right. So Hinduism is going to be a unique religion in the aspect of how welcoming they are to new prophets. So when a new prophet appears, we'll kind of get to why, because of the fundamental understanding of that whole religion. Okay. We'll kind of get to why this happens and why they're able to accept it. But they accept prophets. Like, right. Hinduism, the reason why Hinduism didn't lose much to Buddhism, or it did, but it didn't, is because they just absorbed Buddha into their prophets immediately. Now Buddhism was going to kind of veer off and go on its own course, but you can be a Hindu that's still, your God could be the Buddha, and that could be the one you kind of base your ceremonies on. And there's also a lot of freedom in this religion. Mm-hmm. Between each family, they can kind of give praise to their own gods, and it's a very unique aspect in that realm too. So there's just a lot of creativity, and there's a lot of expansion for kind of like what you personally resonate with, rather than just like this one story. Right. But that would be kind of right off the bat, one of the unique things about Hinduism. And I think that's why it really had a huge push in the West when it was brought over here, because it's kind of such an adaptable religion. And again, there's going to be esoteric and exoteric Hinduism. There's going to be, the inner teachings and the outer teachings. But really with Hinduism as well, they did not hide their esoteric teachings as much. Right. You could go very deep, and it was kind of there, and that opportunity was there. Where in the West, it's news to a lot of people that we have a spiritual movement in the West when it comes to like Western mysticism. And then you start seeing the symbols, and you start seeing it all around us, and we see that it's a huge thing for a lot of big individuals, whether they're on the light side or the dark side. But we do actually have a very rich spiritual tradition. But that esoteric one is very hidden in the West. Like, you have to kind of find it yourself. Where in the East, it's always kind of available if you want to go down that rabbit hole. Right. We
always talked about how the West introduced the devil to the East.
Other way around. The East introduced it to the West.
The other way around. Yeah, my mistake. I just always remember you telling me one or the other. We were talking how it's like, well, how could you not want to divide them? You know? And I always thought that was an interesting aspect of that, but
that's interesting, because that was happened during the Crusades, and we're going to kind of talk about too is how important it is to when these cultures get connected and you have the ability to tap into this information and how it kind of could evolve, because that's when alchemy got kicked back up into place. That's when the Knights Templars, like the original Knights Templars, were really doing the work of the light workers and of white magicians. They were really doing a lot of amazing stuff. And it's because they got connected to the mysteries again,
Right.
because they were leaving the Dark Ages. But it was us going on the Crusades, which was this like terrible mission to try to gain Jerusalem.
Right.
And but in that aspect, the highest knights were getting initiated to these Islamic mysteries and all these other Persian kind of mysteries everywhere that they were kind of going. And that really gave a resurgence of, I mean, that was the cause of the Renaissance. That was the cause of alchemy coming back. That was the cause of us studying astrology again,
Right.
because we were in a dark age and it was kind of this time. So again, when we have these connections with these different cultures, we kind of do have this information that is, it's like a passing of information. And it's so important at this time when we talk about why it's so important to get like a very holistic view of the world's consciousness, is because we're getting interconnected. And this whole aspect of consciousness is physically getting connected through things like the internet. And we're seeing negative aspects of that, but there's also got to be positive. And that's going to be this connection with the idea that we're all on this journey. And it's, you know, it's that knowledge of self is what we're really actually here for. And
Right.
us being able to connect on the internet gives us really unreal potential, you know?
Yeah, you can see what's really interwoven. And most people had never wanted to even go past the side that they stand on.
Right.
You know?
Right. So,
So I mean, will we also cover like Buddhism and then Taoism and like you know, besides Taoism, but also the Confucian philosophy?
yeah, no, and you know, so we're gonna, so how we're gonna kind of look at it today is just kind of more of a viewpoint of how they view the universe,
Right.
and so, you know, like China views the universe as kind of an organism, this living organism, right? And that's where we kind of see it all come through Chinese mythology, and that's going to have a lot of influence on the neighboring countries. The Hindu religion and everything that's going to be coming out of India is really going to look at the role of the Godhead as more of a dramatic experience. The Godhead actually participating in the human consciousness. Okay, so it's very interesting because when we speak about the God and the universal creation, in both religious texts, they talk about the idea of God playing to create the universe. So when we think about it in the West, we think of play as him playing with blocks and actually building the physical universe, right? Yeah. And this is our attraction with being able to build. And this is why in the West it is, we like to build high skyscrapers and like, you know, this is why manufacturing really was a big thing in the West. And we kind of made that rules very quickly because we see it God as this builder, the builder of this creation. And through metaphysical studies and like alchemy, you really start seeing that God is actually in everything, right? But this whole Abrahamic religion sees really God as this builder. And if we even think about the esoteric foundations that really kind of push this esoteric understanding, it's the Freemasons, right? The builders, the master builders. There's not a coincidence that Jesus was a carpenter. Right. So this is how we kind of visualize the Godhead in the West. We very much visualize him as a play, but it's like playing with blocks. Where in Hinduism, they're going to more see this as a dramatic play. Okay. They're going to see it as the Godhead participating in life, where the idea that the Godhead is just the self, and that's the highest self. And that's really the only thing that's real. And the Godhead is in everything. Everything from humans to animals to bugs to even rocks, that energy is there and they perceive that energy. So that's when a new prophet comes around, instead of fighting it, they're just like, oh, hello, like you've come back, you know, because how they see it is it's this big game of hide and seek. Yeah. They see it as God's playing hide and seek with himself. And again, when we kind of break down Western alchemy and everything like that, it's the same kind of conclusion. It's this idea that our higher self is always kind of playing hide and seek with ourselves. And it's this game of remembering and forgetting, experiencing a spiritual moment, and then getting kind of pulled back to that material and just the aspect of that. And so really what we're kind of looking at is, I mean, even like in Hinduism, when you're at yoga and you say namaste, right? That namaste is literally saying like, I see universal energy within you, and you recognize my universal energy. So there's always that kind of interplay. And we in the West very much look at this as the universe as a construct. Okay.
Yeah, I like that. To take this from a lecture I listened to with Alan Watts, what you just said, just like hit me just for a second. Was he was like, you might know the moves to the dance, but you're not really dancing, and it's something we do a lot here in the Western or in Abrahamic, as you're saying, like ideas is like you're getting it all as far as like the structure of what it is, but are you really interwoven into like what the beauty of the art is? And so. What you just said just kind of like hit me with that. But go on.
Yeah, no, that's 100% it, man, because that's exactly what that difference kind of entails. And again, they're both correct. Like the creator did create this universe and it's this five sense construct. It's just kind of how we perceive it, So really, and you go even like just kind of thinking about stuff like in the West, even like our spiritual art was all kind of based around the Fibonacci sequence. Like we like to see those patterns. And again, they see those patterns in Hinduism as well, like in their mantras and everything that they kind of create. But we see it and we're always kind of trying to mimic that view of God, So we see it with that Fibonacci sequence. And just that whole idea of that master builder and that idea of, even like, I am a creator, and you kind of even think about how we kind of utilize the energy in the West, like with the whole law of attraction and people, how do I manifest? How do I create? Right. That's something you kind of hear a little bit more in Western language, where Eastern language, they have that power and they do it, but they don't really use that I like in the creator. It's more of just kind of like I am, and then it kind of happens, if that makes sense.
It does. It's a very like, not Nietzsche, but like sort of Socrates is like that. I mean, just like the personalities that have been influenced by such things will declare what they are and what they've done and how come you haven't done enough. Right. And like, you're not wrong. There is a reason why we're here and we should, build, if you will, but there's a way and a process to it that doesn't just involve only one, and I feel like those from that time, at least from the philosophies that I'll read about, or like philosophical history of certain individuals like that, that's a lot that comes forth. It's just like, why aren't you doing this? This is what you should be doing. This is the time you have to do it. And it's very like intense,
Yeah, and that's I'm glad you brought up the Alan Watts thing, because he's really the individual that really did a great job of breaking down Hinduism for us in the West and kind of gave it to us to like a digestible intake. And, he speaks about the idea of play and how the Hindu religion kind of sees this, or this here Hindu spiritual practice kind of sees this idea of play. When we think of play in the West, we think of play almost as like a trivial thing, like, oh, I'm playing games. But the word play really doesn't entail that. Play, like, when somebody's playing, like say someone's classically trained of playing the violin, they're doing something. It's not trivial. It's not like they're just playing games, or how he kind of says it, or just doing it for kicks. No, it's actually an experience. When we're dancing, when we go to a play and see a great actor, we know what's on the stage is not real, but we're still kind of engulfed in it, and it's the aspect. And again, with music, like somebody's playing music, it's not to get to a certain part. It's in the aspect of doing it for itself. And that's kind of how they perceive how consciousness kind of evolves. Like, it's the aspect of evolution, and that's why we're doing it. It doesn't have a beginning. It doesn't have an end.
Exactly.
It's just that play. It's just like when you're dancing, you don't dance to a certain part on the floor and stop. It's just this like circular motion.
Yep.
Even with music, he speaks about how, if it was a race, if music was a race and it was a start to an end definition, it would be the fastest bands would be the best bands, but that's not really, the case. So, really this idea of this dramatic play and this aspect that we are a part of this play and the Godhead, this ego energy that's within us that we've always kind of talked about, that you connect with the spirit, is perceiving through us and experiencing through us. And this is what the whole fool's journey is all about. It's about waking up to this experience that you are the Godhead. Now, you're not the ultimate creator, but you partake in the creator. And just like how all raindrops will eventually make their way back to the ocean, that's how our own independent consciousness works. And that's what this whole process is about, is being individuated, like we kind of talked about last week with the fall from the soul, from that universal energy and going on that path, and then connecting back to that. So that's when the raindrop makes itself back to the ocean, right, which is that universal process. And it's what all raindrops are attempting to do. So yeah, it's like a, it's this whole pattern and how they kind of perceive it, but it's really this beautiful experience that they've kind of portrayed, and it's really helped us, I think, in the West make spiritual progress and really start to even investigate what our spiritual understanding is. And it kind of woke that up, because I think it gave another birth to like Western mysticism when it kind of arrived in the States. So, and as we kind of continue, one thing we do want to kind of approach, because this is a term that we're going to look at and kind of revert back to. So this is just kind of like, as we always try to create this common language, there's two different words that we use in Christianity when we describe the Godhead. And this will kind of help really kind of describe how we kind of perceive these differently. So in Christianity, you have apophatic language, and that is the negative representation of what God is. It's really kind of what God is not, right? And so when you're describing God, apophatic language is going to be such thing as like, God is infinite, right? Not finite. He's infinite. God is, he's eternal. There's no beginning. There's no end. Right. So it's kind of what it's saying God is not. And this is kind of what you would consider like metaphysical studies, right? And this is kind of a way. So apophatic is going to be language that is going to say what God is not. Cataphatic language, that's going to be the positive side of this language. And this is going to say what we kind of almost perceive God as. So this is going to be myths. So this is going to be like God the Father, the Holy Mother. Okay, this is going to be how we almost personify God and almost kind of put it into a box. Right. And Christianity, especially Western Christianity, is really going to be more based off of cataphatic language. So the idea of attaching, this is the image of Jesus, when really we know that there's no really image of Jesus. This is just kind of what we had to personify the essence to get the understanding. But once you kind of try to define something you can't define something that's both in the box and outside of the box. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where that apophatic language comes in. And like Greek Orthodox Christianity is very based on apophatic language. Your Roman Catholicism is going to kind of be based more on cataphatic language. So again, it's kind of their different approaches to speaking about the Godhead. And so when we're kind of utilizing that idea, that apophatic language, that negative is very much kind of how the Hindu approaches the metaphysical understanding of their religion. But they also have cataphatic language in all of their myths, because the myth is just kind of this image. It's this internal image that makes itself manifest, and we have this understanding of it. But these two terms are very important, because apophatic language it really alludes to the idea that it's this elusive idea of God. Because once you even start thinking about it and you start boxing it in, it's the space in between, it's the space around. You can't actually, we can personify it for a better understanding, but when we really get deep down into it, you can't put your finger on that. Right. You know what I mean? Like it's even like how putting a finger on anything is actually very hard, because like you could see water dripping, and I could be like, what's that sound? Like, what is that? And you could say it's water, but it's really not the water. It's like the dripping. So it's really hard when we kind of start breaking down materialism to even put that stuff in a box. So to put God in a box, it's extra hard, and it's impossible. And that's why apophatic language was almost created by man, was to give us this understanding that there's this internal information it can't be packaged by logic alone. You have to kind of surpass it.
So would you say like the cataphatic, if you're just like, so I'm all on the same page with all this. So the cataphatic would try to define such things like science and medicine try to define certain things.
Kind of, yeah. Like, so, I mean, kind of that's...
So you're right, you're not wrong. That is water, that is the sound, but it's beyond like being able to scale it in such a way.
Yeah. And I mean, again, too, we just... it kind of comes down to when we really start thinking about everything is, it's like when this is a great thing with Socrates, right? Socrates made one of his students. He's like, what is that? And he's just like, oh, this is a carrot. And he goes, what's a carrot? And he goes, oh, it's a vegetable. He's like, what's a vegetable? And the student owns up. He's like, it's a carrot. And Socrates is like, now I know nothing because you just described one thing with another thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
So again, that's like a great story. And again, it kind of takes a little bit to process. And it's just the idea that, again, there's this universal, even how we kind of perceive material image. We know that this material realm is this idea of almost like this Maya. It's this illusion, because the only thing that's actually really true is ourselves and the connection of ourselves.
Right.
And that internal energy consciousness is what's real. Everything else is just this vibration, 5-cent mass, right? Now, that doesn't mean that this experience isn't important, because again, we know this is for the evolution of our soul, and this is how we make our journey back.
Right, but we perceiving that what is in front of us is what gives it its actual vitality. Because if we didn't exist to perceive or to have the 5 sense construct, as you like were just saying, then no one will know,
right,
that this is even here.
Well,
even though if it's occurring, it's
it kind of comes to the whole story of like, if a tree lands in the woods and there's not, right, and that's exactly what it is.
To hear it, then did it?
It didn't make a sound. It made a vibration, but to make a sound, you need something to recept to feel that vibration.
Exactly.
So, again, that's kind of where we're kind of looking at with this whole idea. And that cataphatic, apophatic, you can go down like quite the rabbit hole. And they're both very important. Like, we need myth. We need these stories of consciousness and how they express themselves and all the amazing stories. And then we also need that apophatic to remind us that, like, we're just personifying something. We're putting something in a box, but this is something, when you put it in the box, it's on the outside of the box, it's inside the box, and it is the box.
Right.
Total side note there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really this this interesting kind of elusive kind of way to kind of look at consciousness. And that's something that, again, was woken back up to us when we started getting connections and we kind of got our way out of the dark ages. But even like fundamental like religious sects don't look at this. They look at, they take the very literal, right? And that's like the idea of like very literal readings of the Bible and not seeing the allegory and kind of like the beauty between it. So like this cataphatic language is such as like God the Father or God is love, right? It's these positive designations. So the metaphysical language of Hinduism that we were kind of talking about, that's the idea that this universe is a big act, that it's this universe is God playing hide and seek with himself. And it's all about that self, that cosmic I. So that I am, right? Which is so important in all religions, that idea of like, I am. And that's really where we end. Like, it's I am. Like, if somebody's like, who's down there? You say like I, like it's your representation. It's that universal energy kind of coming out you. That's why, when Moses asks him about the burning bush, and he's just like, who are you? He just says, I am, I am. And it's really the most powerful things you can say. And it's such a unit of manifestation. And we're going to do a whole episode on I am, because it's endless, and I'll kind of go off on a tangent right now. But this idea of this play is really going to be their cataphatic, and this idea that this is all this drama that's kind of playing out in front of us, and it's real, and the Godhead has to participate in it, because again, it comes down to the evolution of consciousness. But the idea of, in Hinduism, they very much have that idea of waking up from this and understanding that they are taking in, that they are universal consciousness, right? We're individuated aspects of universal consciousness, and the whole goal is to get back to that source energy, get back home. And that's kind of why we always say the fact of like walking each other home, because that's what we're kind of doing, and that's what the hero's journey is all about. It's about making your way back home, and the people that help you find your way back home. Right. But just like that water drop that drops hundreds of miles away from the ocean, it will eventually make its way back to the ocean. Right. So, yeah, I feel like in regards to that language and the idea of that cataphatic and that apophatic, this is why when situations like this is why like we'll misinterpret stuff in the West, like especially in our education system, because if you take like a world religions class in like a high school or maybe like first year college and the TA's teaching it, they'll tell you that Buddhism, and I've heard this from many like world religion teachers, is like is an atheist religion, like they don't believe in a God, and that couldn't be farther from the truth.
No.
The truth is that they speak of their God in this apophatic way. So they can't put a word to God. So when this like Western student from like, some kind of university goes and asks them like, what is God? And they just laugh at him. He takes it as like, oh, they're laughing at the idea of God, and they're laughing that God, because they see God in this person, is asking this question. And they're like, don't you know who you are, God? So they're laughing at him, not to be mean, but they're just like, oh, is this how we're playing hide and seek with ourselves right now?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's just that beautiful way. So that apophatic and that cataphatic, it's going to be a very important aspect as we kind of continue the spiritual process, and to recognize both aspects of it and realize that they're both important to us. And again, both religions kind of use both of them. But this whole idea of this interplay between the East and the West, and the idea that, we do manifest and we do need to create this world that we need to create, but also it's this realization of the internal self and waking up from that dream state so we can actually start aiding in the evolution of consciousness.
Right. I always like to use metaphors and analogies, but like something I was thinking about while reading one of Alan Watts's lectures is he goes on about describing what in the Western philosophy or in the Western culture could be seen as a thing. But I was really paying attention to what he was saying and what he means by the thing, and how in a certain way of thinking, whether it's within a scope of medicine or engineering or any kind of architectural achievement or building that we're talking about, that's what you scale down to the thing, and that's what we want to do. So the God, it would be the thing. But I like the idea that there is no thing without the everything, and everything is everything. So, but it's really hard, because if you walk up to someone and say, no, I know you're doing the thing, but you're doing the thing for everything. And they're like, what are you talking about? No, I'm doing this thing so I can get what I need, and then it's over. And it's like, no, but that all has a cause and effect on the all that's one, you know what I mean? But there's that division right there where one is focused on the thing, and then there's the idea of everything. And it's really hard to kind of like put into perspective if someone's like, what do you mean the everything? Like, I don't understand what you're saying, It's like, no, it's all the same.
Right.
But I don't know, I just think it's interesting that we always have to have those oppositions like that, where people are like, what you're saying is too much for me to understand, therefore I need to put you in a place of order, so the way I perceive things analytically speaking. And I just think if you scale it back to just the way the brain works, so does the earth in that sense, like it's divided in those hemispheres where it's like, this is one and this is the other. But of course we must, meet them both in the middle, as we always talk about the middle path.
No, that's perfect, man. Because if you do look at a map, it's broken up like the two hemispheres of the brain, because that logical side is going to be more of that Abrahamic religion, right? And that'll be the left side. And then the more holistic, intuitive side would be kind of come more from that, like from those Eastern religions. So you're right. Just how we have to put the pieces of our brain back together and really light up both hemispheres, it's the same process for the earth, as above, so below. And that's the process that's actually going to yield the results that we want and deserve. It's when we unify both the neocortex in ourselves and as universal consciousness, right? And that's why we always talk about how important it is for us to be doing this work. And even if you try to tell people about this stuff and they're not listening, it's still so important that you're doing this work. Now keep speaking the truth into existence, because that's how we really manifest truth to blossom. But you make so much progress, more than you ever know, when you take up these steps, because you raise that potential for everybody to turn on that network of that left hemisphere and that right hemisphere, man. So I think that's a perfect way to look at that, because that's exactly what the goal is of this consciousness, and this unification and this oneness, right? So again, you're speaking about that individual, and one thing we really perceive in the West is it's very hard for us not to see the illusion of separation, because we are so separated in the West, because it's like, oh no, these are my things, those are your things, right? This is me and that's you. You're me, you're you, and I'm me, right? Where the Hinduism wouldn't see that. Even Rastafarianism, like Rastafarianism, they have a great saying that's I and I. So it's I and I, like you are me and I am you, I and I. So like when they see each other, and that's kind of like a great way to say like goodbye to like a good friend of yours is just I and I, like I see what you are and you see what I am, because we are the same. Right now we have our own perspectives and we have our own journey and consciousness, but that internal source that's pumping your heart, that's making everything go, is the same source that's pumping in my heart, right?
That's awesome. I had no idea about that. That's
great.
Yeah,
Rastafarianism is a beautiful. We're going to go into Rastafarianism because they such a beautiful religion. Like the idea of the worship of the lion. That's Leo. That's Leo during the summer solstice. What we were talking about last week. That's that's the spot that you gain to, and that's the spot you fall from, and that's why it's a lion, because it's the long, it's the rays of the sun, and that's what they're representing when they do dreadlocks.
Right.
Yeah, Rastafarianism is such a deep religion. So now that's another thing. We it's so important for us to learn these other religions and these spiritual practices, because some of them were taken away from us, right? So we lost so much deep information in Africa. When they did the African slave trade and we broke up Africa, we lost so much spiritual information. And now some of that moved to, Rastafarianism, some moved to Buddhism, but that raw energy that was from Africa, this is the black land. And I'm not talking about the sin, I'm talking about alchemy. I'm talking about this is that where energy generates.
Right.
And we see that with who can move masses, who can make energy move like no other. It's that African vibration. Right. It's so important. We lost that energy. We lost ancient Chinese information too. Like the most richest, powerful, like most advanced spiritually, probably around at that time period. Within 100 years, we lost everything. And we need that information that we lost from China. Because it wasn't until like the 1850s we forced them to start doing trade with us. And they were kind of on a decline after that, because they kind of lost their significance of quality over quantity.
Exactly.
But then again, when the New World Order took over and they did the Great Leap Forward in the Communist Revolution, not only did China lose 100 million people, they lost their culture, they lost their religion, they lost their spirituality, right? And we're seeing the effects of that today, and we lost that spiritual information. So this is very important for us to collect all the spiritual information that's left. So that's why we have to collect the alchemy, we have to collect Hinduism, we have to try to find good sources for any kind of native country, any kind of native inhabitants of any land, right? We need to get that information. We need to incorporate that in ourselves. It's almost like a race at this time, because there's a reason why they took out, there's a reason why they have kept that African vibration and fear. There's a reason why they took China out of the scene, because these were power players that wouldn't have let this New World Order happen.
Of course.
Because they're earth movers, right?
They're
both
vibrating,
of them.
Like you said,
you know?
earth movers.
And we're all are earth movers, so I'm not saying one has more than the other, but some have potential physical change in the physical realm happen very quickly. Some it's more of an intellectual thing, some it's more of an emotional thing. Some vibration of our nationalities is going to make us a little bit more tuned to art. Others are going to maybe make us more in tune to the orientation of word. But this is just the vibration of kind of your tribe that came before you, of kind of like your ancestors, and you partake in that vibration. It's just like astrological energy. It's what you do with it or not. But
you have intuitive vibration that you should never want to lose, yet you will be tempted to give it away. And that's the problem, is like that's what ended up happening with both cultures you just mentioned, whether it's an African or Eastern, as far as like a China, the vibration that they both brought were able to be caged and then turn on to them for monetization. It's like, no, you're not going to go that far. You're going to go only here and only to this, like this ratio or this like vibration. Then we're going to monetize or like make some
the hijacking.
The hijacking. There you go. Thank you. So yeah, it's interesting but the cool thing is they haven't, or the optimistic way of looking at it is you still have your vibration that is intuitive. You know what I mean? You just got to make sure you don't
Oh, again.
let it be swayed or taken over. But
yeah, and the only way they're going to do that is by fear, and by either real fear that they're actually creating, or like making the manipulation of fear. But that is the biggest aspect, and again, it's affecting our consciousness right now. You can feel it in the air when you walk around right now. There's just this sense of fear, and there's nothing that's bigger than that's going to lower our vibration. That's the absolute opposite of what we need to be doing. We need to be taking that fear and inverting it into love at this moment, and that's really what we have to kind of work. And it's definitely an uphill journey at the moment.
It's meditation. It is a meditation, and actually, it's very attainable. I mean, like you were saying, this is why we're here. So, if someone else is going to manipulate that vibration and divide it into two, then it's only our. It is our job. It is our mission to take the one that feels left out and make it inclusive, because no one ever really divided them. They just divided themselves by what they heard. And it's important that, you have, that's what I'm saying. We have the intuitive power and knowledge, meaning like if your opposition is the one that, say ends up losing, well, you're not going to win if the other half isn't nearly as, joyous as you are. You can only express or can only enjoy that mutual ground being enjoyed by the two. And it's something that we know how to do. You see children do it instinctually. Like no kid wants to really leave out the other kid, you know what I mean? But we're taught why you would leave one kid over the other. It's like, oh no, you're not part of this class or that side, or you're not brought up the way they're brought up. It's crazy, but we always have the source to bring it back. I mean, and I mean that, like I've been saying this throughout the whole podcast, like waving to your neighbor. It's like, you don't realize that your neighbor itself might be thinking, there's no way that person's going to even want to make eye contact with me because all hope is lost. And then if you were to proceed with, going with your intuition, just giving a friendly wave, all those speculations just crumble in like a second. That person's like, oh, like I was wrong about that. And it's super magical. It's just something that's super overseen by people. It's just like, oh, no, like that's how you collapse those things. That's how you really do the work, one at a time. But anyways, I digress.
No, I love that, man, because again, and that kind of comes down to what you originally brought up, and we kind of went on that when I went on my little soapbox about them hijacking energy, about illusion of separation. Don't get me started. We'll get on that soapbox all day. The illusion of separation, and the idea that we perceive that we're separated, but we really are oneness, And a good analogy was in that lecture when he was talking about how, all over your body, you have millions of these nerve ends. And imagine almost that like all of those nerve ends had a little eye, because, again, everything is touch anyways, right? But just kind of imagine, because it's the most sensitive thing, that all those nerve endings have a little eye. So you would imagine like, so if every impression of the world kind of gets in and sends it back to the central brain, and that's what all those nerve endings are doing. They're all independent nerve endings with their own eyes, but they're all sending information back to the central brain.
Right.
Well, almost in a similar way, every person, every animal, every sentient being can almost be looked at as the eyes that look out of the one central self. So the problem is we don't see those connection lines of the nerve endings and how they connect to the central brain. So we perceive that we are individualized. We perceive that there's a separation because we don't see that actual connection. But we know all of those nerve endings in our arms and our legs all connect back to our brain. Right. So we know there's a one unit, even though they're all independent nerve endings that are having different experiences and sending back different sensations. We know that there's a unified central brain that it all goes back to. Right. And this is that idea we were talking about. And this is going to be one of the beautiful things that Hinduism is going to bring to this understanding and kind of make people kind of get that picture of. And again, it's going to be what the alchemists come to the conclusion of as well in their meditations. It's the whole universal study. It's what all esoteric is about. But again, it's that idea that with this illusion of separation, we are actually connected. And that's what transcends every issue that we have, because when it's not a political thing, it's not a racial thing, it's a universal consciousness thing, and we are all one. And if you're in pain, I'm going to feel pain. Like, we're never going to progress as long as there's human trafficking. We're never going to progress as long as people are breaking natural laws. Like, as long as natural laws getting imposed on, we're going to see negative consequences. Now, we can limit those actions, and that's it's going to be slow steps, and it's really going to start with us. but just we're one unit. So karmically, we're going to pay as one unit. So if we're letting evil happen, if we're letting tyranny happen, if we're letting fear be propagated, we're going to see those aspects of the aggregate. And I think that's a huge thing that Hinduism kind of helps us do, is really see the idea that, we are one.
Right.
All is one, one is mind. And just that idea that it's so hard for us to perceive in the West, because, it is amazing that we have this individual identity. But the process of playing hide and seek yourself is realizing that the core mood, you're one with everything.
Right. And you can see that in all aspects of every practice, of everything that we do. Especially again, I always like to use the metaphor or the analogy for medicine, but it's the same thing. I mean, you have so many specialists in the Western world that specialize on each organ in the body, but yet, it's all coming from a central system that they know better, but that was completely eradicated. I think at the end of the 19th century, or the turn of the 19th century, is when people started kind of, basically undoing what Eastern influences we had within the body and its properties, and started to separate it, segregate it. And then therefore, by default, we do that to ourselves as a born individual. So even when consciousness arrives, we're like, oh, but if I have an ailment, I need to go see this one guy to help me with this one thing. And we apply that to a lot of other things in our life. I'm not good at this one thing, therefore I'm not good at all. And that's why you see such just faulty in our society. There's these faultinesses because of how it's an influence and how we've been segregated, taken away from the universal source in all ways, though. See what I'm saying? It's not just I'm using medicine for that, but in everything else, people are no, there's just me, So all in all, I guess what I'm trying to say is, that sort of segregation of who we are away from the source is seen in a lot of things within our society that we grew up in. And I think a lot of us are attempting to gain it back, and some of us are not. Some of us are rejecting it. And then in between the gaining of those understandings, then there's the hijacking. Once again, it's once those principles start to make their way over into our lives and start to be welcome as far as an idea, you quickly find that someone put a price tag on it too. You're just oh, I just need to learn how to, and they're yeah, but let me be the one to teach you, and I'm going to charge you this much money. And I'm talking about anything that's new age, anything that's been not brought over, but has already been here, but yet picked up by the individual who wants to explore what more there is out there. It's already been hijacked,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, man. I think the social engineers saw when all this, really strong, amazing gurus were coming here. And I think at the same time, they kind of created their own little false gurus, and they tried to muddy the waters because they saw this as a problem. Because if we start seeing ourselves as universal consciousness as one, they lose all power.
Right.
All power is gone, because power actually doesn't even exist. Nobody has authority over you. You are your own conscious being. This is the only property you have, but nobody has ability to impede on you traveling or anything. You are an open, free source individual. So when we talk about that higher self, Atman is how you would say it in India. And again, my pronunciation is a little tough, but that's kind of the idea of this highest self. But Atam, and then in Egyptian, this idea was Atum. And then in Christianity, in Abrahamic legions, this idea is going to be Adam. And then in our scientific community, this is atom, right? The building block of matter,
right?
The building block of consciousness. And it all kind of comes back down. And again, as above, so below, just how there's a single-celled organism in us that's expressing consciousness. Right. We're expressing consciousness. And then there's higher levels of conscious expression that's beyond us,
right.
And really understanding that this is not the end of this, and that there's this whole journey that we're kind of continuing on, I think is just so important. And just how powerful this self is, for the idea that, we're only aware of so much of our conscious understanding. We don't think about taking breaths. We don't have to beat our own hearts. We don't have to grow our own hair, right? There's so much automation that's kind of happening with consciousness. So when we really talk about this evolution of consciousness, and you kind of think about this aspect, so again, when you kind of think about this automatic aspect of consciousness and how it evolves and how it kind of creates, this is why you see almost the many-armed gods in Hinduism. So you'll see like gods with like a bunch of arms. And what this is really kind of representing is like the idea of the centipede, how the centipede, when it's moving, it doesn't have to think about moving each of its legs. Like it just is this motion. It's just this play. And it's just this doing it for the act of doing it, right? It's not thinking about it individually. And this is kind of how that universal energy was perceived in the Hindu community. So again, in the West, we kind of have this idea, and mostly like what you would say like fundamental religious ideas, but this idea that everything's pre-planned with a Hinduism would be like, no, it's kind of like this motion. And depending on where that caterpillar goes, that kind of is where the evolution of consciousness will fall. But it's that process of like that automation aspect of consciousness, which is so fascinating. And again, when we're just like, why we kind of brought up this one is so we can really kind of get into the study of reincarnation versus human reincarnation, because we're always going to be kind of comparing the West with the East, because they do have a little difference understanding or beliefs on reincarnation and human reincarnation. But again, the end is the same. It's all about character development, and the end is the same in the story that we talked about today. Like it doesn't matter what you do. It's all about the betterment of the self, the raising of that consciousness, connecting to that higher self, aligning yourself with truth, and just being a complete individual and making yourself back to God, making that way, making that way and drop back home, and that's kind of what that conclusion is on those aspects.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Again, I always love that we get back to the application. So, yeah, I mean, I guess, I don't really have much more to add. I mean, there's so much I can go. I mean, if you just saw Daniel's notes, there's so many,
I know, right?
Pages, and so do I here. And it's like, I know we can just, there's so many jumping points that we can go from, or, places that we can just sort of like take off from. And I'm glad that we brought this up so we can like, again, you were talking about, what's to come. And I always like that we're foreshadowing or at least expressing like where this will go next,
Yeah, no, I think that's great, man. And I think you're right. I think this is a great kind of cutting out point, because we really just, the big things we were kind of trying to do today was just kind of, it's almost a primer, and it's just kind of like an introduction to this topic, because we are going to go much deeper on a lot of the stuff we brought up today. But one thing is, I did want to give a shout out. We have 5 patron subscribers already.
Man,
so
I
that's
saw
really,
that.
so thank you so much.
Yes, we do.
And again, this week has been a little crazy with everything going on in the world.
Right.
So we haven't had the ability to really update stuff, but be on the lookout. We got some stuff coming out over the weekend.
The merch.
Oh, you updated the merch too?
Yeah, we got some new stuff on there. Yeah, it's gonna be good.
That's so cool. I'm excited. I gotta check that out.
No, it's all good, because it's been a busy week. So
yeah, it has been. So really do a really big shout out to the patron listeners.
Thank you.
So yeah, thank you, and just kind of stay patient. We're gonna make sure we got stuff on there, but guys, we're really looking about doing a lot of videos, starting like a book club on there as well, where we'll all kind of read the same text and get together and kind of talk about that stuff.
Love that.
Me and Eddie are going to do like a monthly, like almost like a mailbag question thing, where we'll kind of have like a live feed where we'll be connecting with you guys, just answering your questions, getting to know you more.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And it'd be more of like a group discussion, especially, how we're starting off small. And then as we get more numbers, we'll just kind of break up those discussions. But it really does mean the world for us for the support, because we want to do this all day, every day.
All day, every day.
Right?
Yeah, man.
So, but all the love. Also, one big last shout out. Whatever happens in this world, just know that you are universal consciousness. And as long as we align ourselves with truth, and as long as we always express through love, we're going to find our way back home. So all the love, we wish you all peace. And I think this is about the time we say until next time.
Until next time. All right.